Devin Pike with the Dallas International Film Festival, and once again, an astonishing slate of documentaries here at the festival this year. One of them is Private Violence, the story of an Oklahoma woman who was abducted, taken hostage, and then rescued. But the story only begins there because her journey, not only to place her own life back together, but to see that the person who abducted her receives justice, is at the crux of the story. And there's a larger story about domestic violence wrapped up into the documentary. Kit Gruelle is here. She was a victim of domestic violence herself and an advocate for victims of such abuse. She joins us here today. Kit, first off, thank you for bringing this film to the festival, and thanks for coming out to Dallas.
It's great. Thanks so much for having me.
I'm curious, from your own experience, from someone who goes through something so traumatic in their lives, it seems just from a personal standpoint, it would almost seem like once you get your own life back in order, to delve back into it and want to not only make sure that the person who damaged your life in such a fashion is brought to justice, but also to recount that process on film and then to be able to tell that story out. Obviously, it's important to spread the word, but what's the personal struggle for someone who is looking to heal from an experience like this when they've got a documentary crew following her around?
Well, I think part of it, for those of us who have had this experience, is we know how common it is, and we know how much people don't understand about it. So I think we feel like we need to sort of shout from the rooftops, and that's a part of what this whole process of advocacy and challenging oppressive systems and abusers and that sort of thing is all about. But for me, and I think for Deanna, I mean, I can't speak for her. And by the way, this case is a North Carolina case. She was found in Oklahoma.
Okay.
But it's the case originated in North Carolina. But I don't know. It's not easy stuff to talk about, but it's more difficult to see it not get talked about. So I think that for those of us who do this work, that's one of the big driving forces, is if we don't talk about it, it's just going to keep on happening. And so we feel like it has to be addressed. And I feel like that through this film, we've had a chance to sort of create an atmosphere of intimacy that allows people to understand the complexities of domestic violence.
How were you approached for the documentary?
I actually started the project myself about 13 years ago, and it was originally to sort of lay bare all the different aspects from how domestic violence is dealt with in sports and popular culture, because the media is so oversaturated with images of violence against women. It was just kind of the whole thing, but it's hard to get a documentary done about violence against women because people think that it's just this grim topic. And they also think that they know everything they need to know about it. So I started about 13 years ago and was working with two filmmakers in California. And it was a roller coaster ride of trying to find funders and that sort of thing. But ultimately I found Cindy Waite, and she really understood the value of this project, and went to her two brothers, Norm and Ted, who started Gateway Computers, and one of their big issues is violence prevention. And so they got behind the project, and we did a short, well, not short, it's about a 22-minute trailer, really for funders to show them what this film was going to look like. And then Gloria Steinem saw it, and she got behind it because she said she thought it was the most important thing she'd ever seen on domestic violence. And then, of course, things really snowballed, and then I met Cynthia in North Carolina, because the two California folks had dropped away because there was no money coming in, and Cynthia understood that this was a story that needed to be told. She wound up kind of turning it into this very intimate portrayal of Deanna's story, and then my story a little bit, and we were able to weave in a lot of the things that I had originally wanted to do, which is to talk about not just the relationship between the woman and her husband, but also how society responds to victims of domestic violence. Because it's never just about the abuser. It's always about the layers of misogyny and patriarchy that she runs into as she's trying to find help for herself and her children.
I'm curious if you've seen, because domestic violence is, I don't even want to say it's a hot button topic. It's an extremely important topic in the 21st century, and especially in North American culture. I'm just curious if you see any kind of a turning point where a documentary like Private Violence is able to get hopefully something of a wide release. Documentaries are always harder to.
It's going to run on
get.
HBO in October.
Oh, fantastic! That gets the awkward question out of the way.
Right.
Do you see that there is more of a dialogue, more of a, I don't want to say comfortable dialogue, but is the dialogue there, at least as opposed to even 10 years ago or 13 years ago when you started the project?
Well, I think that we have reached a point where we understand that accurate and complete and comprehensive communication is critical to how people think about it. Because I know I do a lot of traveling. I train hostage negotiators in California, and so when I'm on the plane and a conversation comes up, the first question is, why don't those women just leave? And it's the wrong question to ask. It's a victim-blaming question. By asking that question, we're essentially taking the abuser off the hook. And it also is a very narrowly framed question. I mean, we have to look at things in a more sort of community-based way. And I think that we have come to understand that if we just focus on things like responding to her and the children, which is obviously critically important. But if we only respond to her and to the children, then we're saying to the abuser, well, we're just going to let you go, and you can just carry on. And if you can't put your hands on her, then you'll find somebody else to put your hands on. So what I'm excited about is being able to be on the road with the film and have these larger discussions about how we are still paying for violence in the home because it happens in private, and paying for it in ways that I think the dots haven't been connected. For example, when we screened at Full Frame the other day in Durham, I saw a man who's an old friend whose daughter was murdered, and I worked with him on his civil case against the sheriff's department, because the sheriff's department didn't, when he violated the restraining order, the sheriff's department didn't arrest him like they were supposed to. And this went on and on and on and on and on until he finally kidnapped her and killed her. And so I asked Teddy how much time his daughter's ex-husband got. He got 35 years. In the state of North Carolina, we spend about $40,000 a year per inmate incarcerating them. So I did the math, and that's almost $1.5 million for one case. And we have heard for years now about the problems that we're having with budget issues everywhere, in every state across the country. And when you think that the state of North Carolina is spending $1.5 million incarcerating one man when they could have stepped in and demanded that he live by the terms and conditions of that restraining order, saved Dina's life, the children would have grown up with a mom rather than going to live with their grandparents. I mean, it's just, to me, it's such a no-brainer. We can either invest a little bit on the front end, or we can wait and pay for it in spades on the back end. And that's one of the conversations that I want to have across the country.
You've been traveling around with this film for a little while.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious if there's been any kind of a revelatory experience at the Q&As following. Obviously, it's eye-opening for people who they come into it as a curiosity, but then they're presented with so many stark facts
mm-hmm.
about domestic violence nationwide. Has there been any kind of a good cathartic experience as part of those Q&As?
Well, I think what's cathartic is for the people who are in the audience, because this is a topic that people think they know all they need to know about, and then when they hear the local stories. I know last night there was an advocate there, and she talked about a case that she worked on, and it was a case here in Dallas where a woman was shot in the face, and her husband was a law enforcement officer. And she talked about that this was a jury trial, and what the jury decided was appropriate punishment for him was 10 years probation. And you can hear a gasp around the audience or throughout the audience, because they're like, how could this happen? But this kind of thing happens every day. When we were out at Sundance, the day that we got there on a Thursday. The film premiered on the next Sunday. And on that Sunday, there was a local law enforcement officer, who murdered his entire family and then killed himself. And so part of what's so tragic is that this film isn't just about what happens to women in North Carolina. This happens everywhere. And I think the more we can have the film localized and sadly have the local advocates there to illuminate the realities of what's happening on the ground, here in Dallas or wherever, then people are going to start to realize that they don't know what they thought they knew. And there is a huge amount of interconnectedness between violence in the home and what ultimately winds up on the streets, whether it's gang activity, whether it's substance abuse issues, whether it's teenage pregnancy, whether it's teenage runaways, kids who drop out of school. I mean, we are, as I said, paying for this in all kinds of ways. And I think that we're at a place now where we want to have a more nuanced understanding of this crime.
Is there a resource center or a national-based resource group that you would point people to if they need to, if they're experiencing domestic violence in their home, whether it's themselves or a family member? Is there a group that you recommend to point them towards?
Well, there's the national hotline, which is 1-800-799-SAFE. And that's actually located here in Texas. And then there's another great group here in Texas called the National Center for the Domestic and Sexual Violence, and that's up in Austin. But then the Texas domestic violence community is a very strong, thriving, active community doing a lot with not much. And so I think that we need as much recognition and support for their work as we possibly can, just like we do for DV programs around the country. I remember reading a long time ago, one of the FBI profilers said that domestic violence programs are the best crime prevention programs in the country. And if we can start to understand it like that, then maybe we can get people to see, yes, let's take a stand early on, rather than waiting until we've got a felony assault or a dead body.
You can find out more information about private violence at dallasfilm.org. You can also see the film in October on HBO. Great news on that. Usually, I hate asking the question, what's the life of the film after the festival, because it's so many times you don't get a chance to see it outside of the festival circuit. So that's incredibly heartening as well. Kit Gruelle, thank you so much for bringing this film to the festival, and thank you for coming to Dallas.
Thanks so much. Thanks.
Absolutely.